try to
move on.
answer it?
It's up
The
to you,
chairman
sir.
will. Why don't you try to answer the question, Mr. Secretary? Do you know how many manufacturing jobs the United States lost per day last year, the first year of President Trump's second term?
I don't know that statistic.
U.S. manufacturing lost more than 100 jobs per day from February 2025 to February 2026. That's more than 88,000 jobs in total. It's not a trade policy that delivers for working people.
The tariff and trade policy of President Trump and this administration is to bring manufacturing back to America.
What happens when a congresswoman confronts the Commerce Secretary with the numbers behind Trump's manufacturing promises? Rosa DeLauro came armed with job loss data, challenged Howard Lutnick on the administration's trade policy, and when she demanded answers, the hearing got tense.
During the campaign, the president made a lot of promises about trade policy. And I quote, he would put more money into our pockets and create millions and millions of new manufacturing jobs. I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, I think hardworking families are not really feeling this reality. The president's tariffs have exacerbated the cost of living crisis that people are experiencing today. I know the president says it's not an affordability crisis, that's a hoax, but talk to working Americans every day. They are living paycheck to paycheck. It's tough. And American families now have paid more than $1,700 each in tariff costs last year. And so things are now worse because of the president's war of choice with Iran, and we see the price of gasoline going up. The president made promises also about manufacturing, and the U.S. trade deficit in manufactured goods was $62 billion higher in 2025 compared to 2024. Not exactly the manufacturing renaissance that was promised. So let me ask you, Secretary, and I asked Ambassador Greer the same question last week, and let me ask this of you. Do you know how many manufacturing jobs the United States lost per day last year, the first year of President Trump's second term?
I don't know that statistic.
Okay, well,
One way or the other.
let me just say, this is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. U.S. manufacturing lost more than 100 jobs per day.
But the latest BLS data give us a more complicated picture. Through June 2026, manufacturing employment was down 38,000 jobs over the previous 12 months, even though manufacturing employment increased by about 18,000 over the 6-month period. So the post-hearing numbers show some improvement, but manufacturing employment was still below its level a year earlier.
From February 2025 to February 2026, that's more than 88,000 jobs in total. It's not a trade policy that delivers for working people. Do we not calculate the number of jobs lost? And what do we think about that? You know, this is really pretty extraordinary when we were supposed to, you know, be producing all of these manufacturing jobs. I would just say that the other thing with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, according to them, on net, there was an increase of over 500,000 manufacturing jobs under the Biden administration. And I really don't want to have to talk about the Biden administration, but you all have been here for well over a year, and we now need to measure your performance against standards that you set. There is a decline in manufacturing jobs that we've seen in the first year. So let me ask you what your response to that is, in the decline of manufacturing jobs.
The tariff and trade policy of President Trump and this administration is to bring manufacturing back to America. But as Representative Ming points out, when we were up in Micron, we broke ground on a $100 billion plant that's going to have 40,000 construction jobs. TSMC in Arizona, Again, 40,000 construction jobs. I broke ground in Ohio, 25,000 construction jobs. So the manufacturing is going to start in 2 or 3 years when these factories come online. But
In July, Commerce was still highlighting major reshoring and advanced manufacturing investments, while BLS data showed manufacturing employment remained down 38,000 year-over-year through June. In other words, the investment announcements are real, but the promised factory job payoff is still a work in progress.
construction, bringing this back, 400 billion in pharmaceuticals,
Just
200 billion in autos. These are huge
Well,
historic
let me
numbers.
reclaim my time for a moment, Mr. Secretary, because I know, but you can't even tell us how many jobs we've lost. So I don't know about what we're seeing in the future. But this is a good a segue for me, what you're doing. Your budget suggests that this committee, and in your budget request, you abandon the programs, do the work of trying to promote American manufacturing. Just, look at you zero out the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which provides small businesses with tools, training, resources to grow, innovate, remain competitive. You also eliminate the Economic Development Administration grants, supporting workforce development, innovation, entrepreneurship. And let me also say, it's worth noting that in your confirmation hearing, you opposed cuts to EDA, and it's now going to be eliminated. You've got the International Trade Administration, the Global Markets Program. How do you propose that small businesses to survive and thrive if you're not going to give them the tools that they need to be able to perform, to support development, to support workforce development? It's just incomprehensible. You mentioned these very large projects that you're doing, but you're cutting all of these efforts off to deal with small businesses and their ability to be able to succeed and to grow manufacturing. Comment? What's the matter?
Mr. DeLauro, thank you.
The time, I just wanted to ask whether you wanted me to
Why don't
respond.
you just try
and
to
move on.
answer it?
It's up
The
to you,
chairman
sir.
will. Why don't you try to answer the question, Mr. Secretary?
Time of the gentlelady has expired. Mr. Clyde?
No answers to the questions.
Thank you.
The latest labor data show a mixed picture rather than the manufacturing boom promised by the administration. The July 2026 jobs report showed overall U.S. employment falling by 23,000, while manufacturing and construction recorded modest gains. At the same time, the broader manufacturing sector remains enormous, with about 13 million jobs in 2025, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics projects little overall manufacturing employment growth through 2034. Trade policy has also continued to evolve since the April 23rd hearing. On August 6, 2026, President Trump announced new measures aimed at strengthening U.S. production of polysilicon, a material important to semiconductors and solar panels. The administration imposed a 15% tariff and minimum import prices on certain polysilicon and solar products, with the new measures scheduled to take effect December 4th. Supporters argue that policies like this can encourage companies to build critical supply chains inside the United States, while critics point to the higher cost tariffs can create for American businesses that depend on imported components. Meanwhile, the U.S. goods trade deficit remains substantial, although June's overall trade deficit narrowed to $73.3 billion. That is why the exchange between Rosa DeLauro and Howard Lutnick matters. DeLauro was not simply asking whether tariffs sound good in theory. She was asking for measurable evidence that the policy was already delivering the manufacturing jobs Americans were promised. Her central challenge was straightforward. If the administration says tariffs are bringing manufacturing back, where are the jobs today? Lutnick's response focused heavily on future investment. He pointed to large projects involving companies such as Micron and TSMC and argued that construction activity would eventually lead to increased domestic manufacturing once those facilities come online. That is an important distinction. A factory announcement, groundbreaking ceremony, or planned investment can indicate future economic activity, but it does not automatically translate into permanent manufacturing employment. Construction jobs can be substantial while a facility is being built, but the number of long-term workers required to operate an advanced factory can be considerably smaller. This is where DeLauro's criticism becomes significant. She was comparing the administration's promises with measurable results rather than future projections. Her argument was essentially that voters should not have to wait indefinitely for evidence that a policy is working. If tariffs are supposed to transform American manufacturing, lawmakers should be able to track employment, wages, production, investment, and the number of factories actually operating. There's also another side to this debate. It would be unfair to conclude from 1 year's employment numbers that tariffs can never increase American manufacturing. Manufacturing investment often takes years to develop. Companies may announce facilities long before production begins, and businesses may make location decisions based on a combination of tariffs, tax incentives, energy costs, labor availability, infrastructure, and national security concerns. The administration can therefore argue that some of the investments discussed at the hearing were evidence that its policies were beginning to influence corporate decisions. But the harder question is whether those investments will produce enough high-paying, permanent American jobs to justify the costs of the policy. Tariffs can protect domestic producers from foreign competition, but they can also increase the cost of imported machinery, components, and raw materials used by American manufacturers. If a company saves money by producing a finished product domestically, but has to pay significantly more for the parts needed to make it, the final economic benefit can become much smaller. That is especially important for small manufacturers. Large corporations may have enough capital to build new facilities and restructure supply chains, but smaller businesses may not have the same ability to absorb higher input costs. That is why DeLauro focused so heavily on programs such as the Manufacturing Extension Partnership and Economic Development Administration. Her argument was that America's manufacturing strategy cannot simply depend on giant corporations announcing enormous projects. Small and mid-sized manufacturers also need training, technology assistance, financing, workforce development, and access to new markets. The latest data reinforce why the argument remains complicated. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says manufacturing employed about 13 million people in 2025 and remains a major contributor to the U.S. economy. But the agency does not project a dramatic increase in total manufacturing employment over the next decade. Instead, the industry is expected to experience significant changes within individual sectors, with some areas growing while others decline. That means the real test of the administration's manufacturing strategy should not simply be whether America announces more factories. The better test is whether those factories actually operate at scale, whether they create sustained jobs, whether wages increase, whether domestic supply chains become stronger, and whether American consumers ultimately benefit rather than simply paying more. The April hearing also exposed a broader disagreement about what government should do to rebuild American industry. DeLauro emphasized direct support for businesses, workforce programs, and economic development. Lutnick emphasized tariffs, major private investment, and the expectation that companies will increasingly choose the United States as their production base. Both approaches recognize that America's industrial capacity matters, but they disagree sharply over how much government support should be provided and which policies will produce the best results. And that leaves the central question. If the administration promised that tariffs would bring manufacturing jobs back to America, should success be measured by announced investments and future factories, or by the number of permanent manufacturing jobs, higher wages, and lower costs that American workers actually see?